Hello, argumentation and debate. I hope that you guys are doing well. I know this is a crazy situation and circumstance, but I wanted to take the opportunity to give you a lecture today, and we'll go through some concepts here that I think will be helpful to understanding argumentation and debate, whether you're writing in argumentative form or you are presenting an oral argument, as we often do in competitive debate. So wherever you're at and whatever's going on, please know that I miss all of you very, very much, and you are in my thoughts and in my prayers. So today we're going to be talking about linguistic consistency, and this has to do with language in argument. So if you remember back to our class, when we would present a particular format of argumentation in competitive debate, the affirmative that goes first would always open up with definitions, because if we don't understand and agree on the definitions that we're using, we really can't have an informed debate, because what happens is the affirmative and the negative, or those that are opposing each other, end up speaking past one another. So it's very, very important that we get definitions correct. And then another layer of debate is this idea of linguistic consistency, making sure that we agree on the arguments and we don't change course in the middle of a particular argument. So let's start with this idea of what is linguistic consistency. What is linguistic consistency? Linguistic consistency is the requirement that all key terms in an argument maintain the same clear, unchanging definition throughout the argument. So as the affirmative, or if you are affirming a particular position or a particular stance or a particular policy, then you want to make sure and define your terms up front and then remain consistent with those terms throughout your argument. And again, this applies to oral arguments as well as written arguments that you may be presenting in a paper or in an essay. So make sure that you define your terms consistently and clearly from a reputable source up front, and then throughout your arguments, maintain that consistency. So when you define your terms in written or oral arguments, these definitions should remain consistent throughout your argument. And we're going to show you in the course of this lecture today how sometimes from a strategic standpoint, if you are making a particular argument from a perspective of wanting to convince or to persuade others that you are correct, or that your particular way of doing things is correct, from a strategic perspective, sometimes you want to deploy certain ways of using definitions that can be to your advantage, or that can be more persuasive in presenting your particular argument. So let's take a look at sources of inconsistent definitions. So what we're going to do first is we're going to explore how to do this consistently, and then as we move forward, we'll talk about ways that we can use this strategically to our advantage in the means of persuasion. So sources of inconsistent definitions. First of all, ambiguity. Ambiguity is defined as more than one meaning of a word or phrase in a single context. More than one meaning of a word or phrase in a single context. So there are two types of ambiguity that you will see, and that is semantic ambiguity, ambiguity that occurs when a word or phrase carries more than one meaning in a particular context. An example here is auto executives recalls cars with reclining seats. So an auto executive, someone that is in charge of an automobile company, can recall a particular make or model of a car because it has defective reclining seats. What that means is that everyone who owns that particular vehicle has to bring it back in, and the problem will be fixed, or they'll provide you with a new automobile. That is a definition of recalling. But in this sentence, right, the way it's formatted, you could also say an auto executive recalls, or he thinks back. He remembers that particular car that he had with reclining seats. And now he's driving a car that doesn't have reclining seats. So you can see how that example shows us ambiguity of language. Now, let's say that you are making an argument for a particular position. You want to avoid any ambiguity of language because it can become confusing and it opens you up for attack from those that are opposing your particular position. And if you're on the negative side of an argument, you want to exploit ambiguities in the language of the affirmative. So this is why you ask questions about the definition. What's your source for that definition? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? It's very, very important that you, as the person on the other side, press your opponent on clear and concise definitions. Because if there is an ambiguity in the argument and in the definitions, then that provides wiggle room for your opponent. And if you press them on a particular problem or issue with a particular definition or stance, then they can wiggle out of it because they've been so ambiguous in the use of language. So remember, as the affirmative, somebody that is affirming a particular position or policy or idea, you want to make sure that you are clear and concise in your definitions. If you're on the other side of that, you want to endeavor to sow seeds of doubt into the minds of your judges by asking questions about the ambiguity of particular definitions. So you, as the negative, you might ask a question like, are you sure about that? Does that word mean exactly what you are proclaiming that it means? So remember, in debate and in policy persuasive arguments, words are your best friends. You want to use them and exploit them and navigate them in a way that is most persuasive. So that's an example of semantic ambiguity. And then there's this idea of syntactic ambiguity. Syntactic ambiguity. Ambiguity that occurs when the structure or grammar of a sentence renders the meaning of a word or phrase uncertain. The example here, campus police were ordered to stop drinking after midnight. Campus police were ordered to stop drinking after midnight. Now, obviously, right, if we saw this edict come from the administration or in an email sent to you by faculty or student services, your immediate understanding would be, okay, they're cracking down on students drinking after midnight. But it can also be read that campus police were ordered to stop drinking after midnight, meaning that the campus police are the ones that have an issue with drinking after midnight. And then further, right, you could further complicate this by drinking. Does that mean drinking alcohol? Does that mean drinking soda? Does that mean drinking iced tea? What kind of drinking are we talking about? So this sentence, right, is so ambiguous, it's not clear and it's not concise. So if you've had any dealings with writing bills for the Student Government Association or a particular club or organization that you're involved in, when you are crafting policy, you can see how this ambiguous language can become difficult at times. So 2 types of ambiguity, semantic ambiguity and syntactic ambiguity. You want to avoid both, or if you're on the other side, you want to find a way to exploit both to your advantage. Let's talk about more linguistic inconsistency. Similar to ambiguity is the idea of equivocation. Equivocation. Equivocation is changing meaning of a key term in the course of an argument. So an example of this would be popular. Now, in debates, you hear the term popular thrown around a lot. Sometimes people will say, well, this is very popular. Everybody's for this, right? And because it's popular, then we should embrace it, that we should do it. Well, the idea of popular can be exploited, right? Because it is a term of equivocation. Let me explain what I mean. Meaning one, equivocation, popular. The meaning of popular, meaning number one, is widely accepted or supported. Whereas meaning two is superficial or shallow. So here's an example of how this could be used in an argument. The idea of public health care reform, the idea of a public health care reform bill has proved very popular in recent months. But health care reform is a serious and complex issue, and it calls us to move beyond popular solutions to a carefully studied plan for the future of our entire system of delivering health services. So if somebody says that something is popular, if they're writing or they're advocating for a particular position, and they say, look, this is really, really popular, we should do it. If you're on the other side of that, your counterclaim is just because something is popular doesn't mean that it's good, or doesn't mean that it's right, or doesn't mean that everyone should be doing it, right? So think about this when you're a little kid. You're lamenting to your parents, but everybody's doing it. I don't want to do it. You know, what is the common retort from your parents? Well, if all your friends are jumping off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge too? So that's an example, right, of leveraging equivocation when it comes to how words can be used and massaged to support or to deny a particular policy position or a particular position that you may or may not be advocating for. And typically as the affirmative, if you're affirming or standing up for a particular position, you want to avoid equivocation. If you're on the other side of that, you want to point out equivocation, right? Now, there are times when this could be used to your advantage. If, let's say that you're serving a constituency. Politicians do this all the time, right? You're servicing a particular constituency, and half of them are for it, and half of them are against it. And so when you're speaking to the half of the group that is for it, then you use strategic language that they walk away thinking, you know, he's just like us. He supports what we support. And then if you're speaking to the half that is against it, then you use language that makes them think or feel that you share their concerns. And so you allow yourself some equivocation there because maybe you're not sure as the leader exactly where you stand on a particular issue. And you're not in a position where you can say, you know what, I don't know. Let me go back and figure this out. In a perfect world, that's the best way to proceed as a leader. I don't know. Let me go back and figure this out. But also, people can accuse you of being uninformed, of not having done your homework, right? Of not being a capable leader because you don't have an answer in that particular situation. Whereas, if you use the language strategically and you allow yourself some room for equivocation, then you can make a statement initially and then come back later and provide more clarity and more precision in your language. And that serves you and serves the organization better because it buys you time as a leader to kind of get up to speed and figure out what is going on. So I hope that makes sense. But the issue is obviously that if you're advocating for a particular position or a particular idea, then you want to generally avoid language that allows you to equivocate unless you're doing it in a strategic manner. And then if you're on the other side of it, you always want to call out people that are equivocating or that are shifting in their definitions or particular stances on an issue. Let's talk a little bit more about equivocation. As I mentioned, equivocation can be intentionally exploited to create confusion about particular meanings. An example of this from advertising is Lucky Strike cigarettes. Lucky Strike still has the slogan on its cigarette cartons, "It's toasted." And they still have that to this day. It first appeared in 1917 and has changed meanings throughout the company's history, and the company has done this on purpose so that they could allow themselves to make health claims about their cigarettes. Basically, the health claim would be, hey, it's toasted, meaning what we want you to take away from this is the meaning that we have purified it, right? It's clean and it's purified. It's going to be soothing to your voice. You won't cough. Never mind that it will cause cancer and you will die, but you're not going to cough, and it has a wonderful taste. So in the history of the company, they've switched back and forth with "it's toasted," meaning, it's like toast. It tastes really, really good. Who doesn't like toast? We all like toast. Toast with butter. And it's a beautiful and wonderful thing. You smoke our cigarettes, it's going to be the same experience as you would have in experiencing, right, that warm toast in the morning that your mother prepares for you. Or when lots of people are clamoring about the health dangers of smoking cigarettes, you can be like, it's going to bake out all of those impurities, and you're going to walk away with a wonderful, wonderful experience of a purified and pristine cigarette. We all know that's not true, but the equivocation allows the company to maintain this on behalf of those that are consuming their cigarettes. So that's the idea behind equivocation. And again, if you are affirming a particular position, you want to do your best to avoid equivocation unless it's in your strategic interest to do so. And then if you're negating it, if you're on the other side of it, you want to point out equivocation. All right, some other examples of linguistic inconsistencies. Redundancy. Redundancy is defined as unnecessary repetition of an idea or term. President Trump does this a lot. In December 2017, he literally did it when he said, we will get rid of redundancy and duplication in my administration. Right? Redundancy, duplication, same thing. No need to use both words. But he did it when he was talking about redundancy in the administration. Also, his habit, the president, again, has a bad habit of doing this, adding adjectives, very, huge, best ever, greatest. These are redundancies and sales techniques that often point to hyperbole or exaggeration, if we want to give someone the benefit of the doubt, best intentions, or deception, right? Somebody's trying to deceive me at worst. So avoid redundancy. Mixed metaphor, a linguistic combination of images that do not belong together. An example is wake up and smell the coffee on the wall. Doesn't really work, does it? Or she knocked her competitors over like a bulldozer, dancing effortlessly to the finish, right? Knocking people over like a bulldozer and then dancing effortlessly doesn't work. Okay, so we need to take that into account and avoid the mixed metaphors and the redundancies. Some further examples, choosing the wrong word, right? Because of the coronavirus scare and the lockdowns and things that are happening. You hear lots of people throwing around this term, martial law, right? They're saying martial law. It's not martial law, as in some guy named Marshall. It's martial law, Martial. Big difference, right? But a lot of times people use the wrong word. You hear this a lot in debate, right? People, maybe they've heard a word, but they don't necessarily know the meaning of the word, so they try to impress the judge with a particular word that they know. Again, simplicity of language, that is the most persuasive. At times you want to use bigger words because they carry more punch, but if it's a word that maybe your judge or your audience may not be familiar with, make sure you define that term for them. And then misusing a common expression. For instance, we will burn that bridge when we get to it. We don't want to burn bridges. We want to build bridges, right? Unless we want to burn bridges, but depending on how you use it. So sometimes if you're trying to use a commonly referred to term and you're not sure if it really works, break it down before you use it and think to yourself, does this make sense, or does this open me up for being misunderstood or misinterpreted? All right, so quick 20-minute lecture there. We're 21 minutes in now. Some ideas of linguistic inconsistencies and the idea that you want to be consistent with your language throughout your arguments because generally speaking, it is more persuasive. So here's your assignment on the discussion board. This will be posted on the discussion board, by the way. Respond with answers to the following questions. Give us one example of ambiguity and equivocation. So you'll have two responses here. Give me an example of ambiguity, an example of equivocation from a current event that is in the news. If you want to literally give me a few sentences and then post a link showing me how this is happening in the news, by all means, that's a great way to do it. Or you can just kind of give me some examples of something you watched, something you saw, something you heard the president say, a cabinet member, a governor, whatever's happening in the news. Give me an example of ambiguity and equivocation from a current event in the news. And then also provide one example of a mixed metaphor or redundancy from your personal life, right? Maybe there's an example, an exchange you had with a parent, with a friend, with a relative, with a boyfriend or a girlfriend that was redundancy or a mixed metaphor. You don't have to do both, one or the other from your personal life. Or again, if you can't come up with one from your personal life, give me one from a news story. All right, those will both be posted in the discussion board. Make sure that you respond in a timely manner. I'll have it defined for you when you see it on the discussion board as to exactly when it's due. Until next time, argumentation and debate. Scott Lloyd signing out. Everybody stay healthy.